If you discovered that your car purchase contract had been altered after you signed it, would you stay silent or step into a battle for justice right there in the middle of the showroom? It was exactly 10:12 in the morning when Natalie Carter returned to Langston Auto Charlotte, the dealership where she had signed her vehicle purchase agreement the previous afternoon. In her hand was a leather portfolio containing the contract, neat and organized, just like her. Her brown hair was tied low. A light coat kept her slender frame warm, and though her gaze remained composed, it carried a glint of caution. She stepped into the gleaming showroom, the sound of her heels tapping softly against the polished floor, unaware that within minutes, a single sentence would alter the course of this entire dealership. At the far end of the room, salesman Brent Holloway stood next to the silver Corolla she had chosen. Gray suit, glossy leather shoes, and a perfectly rehearsed smile made him look like he was ready for a photo shoot. Seeing Natalie, Brent waved politely and approached with confident strides. "Ms. Carter, perfect timing, your car is ready. I just need your final signature and then we'll hand over the keys." Natalie gave a slight nod, then opened her portfolio and pulled out the contract she had signed the day before. "I have a small question," she said, her voice gentle yet firm. "Why does the cost sheet today show 3 additional charges that weren't mentioned yesterday?" Brent paused for a brief second, but his smile quickly returned as if nothing had happened. "Oh, those are just minor adjustments, in line with the manufacturer's latest policy." Natalie said nothing. Instead, she placed the printout from the previous day next to Brent's updated version. There was a discrepancy of nearly $2,200, including charges for electronic protection, advanced interior detailing, and anti-theft VIN etching. She wasn't someone easily swayed by vague phrases like new procedures. She lifted her gaze, looking Brent square in the eye. "I just want to understand why these items weren't included in the original agreement." The smile on Brent's face vanished, his eyes turning cold in a heartbeat, as if he had snapped into a different role entirely. His voice lost its polite tone and turned sharp and impatient. "You already signed, so shut your mouth, take the car, and leave." For a moment, the room fell into silence. But behind the accessory display counter, where a man stood like a shadow beneath the overhead lights, a pair of eyes narrowed. That man was none other than Darius Langston, CEO and founder of Langston Auto Group. And with that one sentence, Brent Holloway hadn't just insulted a customer, he had awakened a storm from the very man he should never have dared to deceive. Darius Langston stood silently behind a display shelf of car care accessories, his eyes tracking every subtle shift in Brent and Natalie's expressions. His worn khaki jacket, faded jeans, and scuffed sneakers made him look like any middle-aged man waiting for his car to be serviced. No one at the dealership recognized him as the founder of Langston Auto, the man who had built an empire from a tiny garage on the south side of Chicago. And that was exactly how he wanted it, because only in anonymity could the truth fully emerge. The early morning breeze outside was still crisp. Moisture clung to the showroom windows, but inside the air felt stifling, not because of the temperature, but because of a spirit that had gone slack. No one greeted customers at the entrance. The reception desk sat empty. Sales tables lay abandoned, printers left open, papers scattered. It all gave the eerie sense that this place no longer belonged to the network's model branch it was once praised to be. When Darius quietly entered through the service corridor at 9:45 that morning, he already sensed this wasn't the Charlotte showroom he once knew. The first emotion he felt wasn't anger, but a strange hollowness, as though he was walking through a memory he used to be proud of, now cracked and fading. Brent wasn't the only concern on his mind. For weeks, regional reports had continued arriving like clockwork. Stable sales figures, no drop in customer retention, even increased revenue per contract. On paper, everything looked on track. But the scattered emails, the notes from customer service told a different story. A client in Raleigh said VIN protection was added without warning. Another from Knoxville asked why they had been charged a vehicle sanitization fee they were never told about. Then, just one day before Darius decided to get in the car himself, the IT department flagged an internal financial document from Charlotte that didn't match the system's standard template. A small detail, but to someone who had once written every operating policy himself, it screamed, something was off. That's why he drove an old Honda Accord, a car that used to belong to his late father, leaving behind the climate-controlled office and his personal assistant, returning unannounced. He wanted to see what happened when no one important was watching. And now, after hearing Brent speak with such cruelty to a woman he instinctively trusted, Darius understood. The issue wasn't just one bad salesman. It was something that no report could ever capture. A shift in tone, in atmosphere, in the way people treated each other when no one made them do the right thing. Darius stepped away from the accessories section and moved deeper into the showroom floor, now beginning to fill with a few scattered customers. He chose a spot tucked behind a row of SUVs, one that offered a clear line of sight to the finance office where Brent had just led Natalie, yet far enough not to attract attention. His gaze settled on the woman, and suddenly, a memory from 3 years ago came rushing back, vivid as if it had never left. Natalie Carter. The name had jolted him for a reason. She once worked as a financial assistant at the Houston branch, one of the quiet yet most remarkable employees he had ever encountered. She didn't speak much, never argued, but was always precise. Once, she sent an internal email to the audit department, pointing out that the fleet sale file for Houston Tech contained rounding errors in violation of policy. That incident, while not scandalous, led to 3 managers being reassigned and triggered retraining for the entire regional accounting team. What Darius remembered most was that Natalie didn't send the report to her supervisors. She sent it to the risk control system, anonymously, discreetly. Yet somehow, just a month later, her HR profile was updated to voluntarily resigned. No inquiry, no report. She simply vanished. At the time, Darius was leading an expansion project in Denver and hadn't intervened. But now, here she was again, not as an auditor, but as a customer, holding a neat folder of documents, her eyes wary but unafraid. She knew she was being drawn into something dishonest, yet instead of reacting, she was stepping back, observing, memorizing every detail. That was when Darius realized this wasn't just about a procedural violation. This was about a culture quietly shifting from the inside out. Brent Holloway, in contrast, had no idea who sat before him. Dressed to impress and speaking with the kind of polished tone that sounded rehearsed, he led Natalie into the finance room with blind confidence. Darius squinted toward them from behind the service counter, where a small monitor looped promotional car videos. He looked like a customer waiting for assistance, but his ears were tuned entirely to the words leaking through the door left slightly ajar. Brent's voice was steady, methodical, breezing through the charges. Darius caught every line. The electronic protection package is mandatory to secure the low interest rate. The interior sanitization fee is standard. VIN etching was completed this morning. Every word pierced like a needle into the heart of the man who had authored the company's customer protection policies 3 years ago. Because Darius knew for a fact, VIN etching had been banned across the entire system after an audit at the Arkansas branch in 2021. No vehicle was to be etched again, the technique proven ineffective and commonly exploited as a markup excuse. But Brent showed no hesitation. He lied with ease, as if this was far from his first time. Darius clenched his hand inside the pocket of his jacket, eyes never leaving Natalie's silhouette. She didn't flinch. She didn't rush to confront. She was listening, absorbing, calculating. And that's when he knew. If Natalie still possessed the integrity she once had, she wouldn't need to yell or accuse. She would only need one person clear-eyed enough to stand beside her. And Darius promised himself he would be that person. Behind the frosted glass of the finance office, Darius leaned gently against the support pillar near the display cabinet, eyes fixed on the scene inside. Brent Holloway was no longer just a car salesman. He was orchestrating a performance with the flair of a seasoned actor. His hand spun the pen with practiced ease, eyes narrowing with the expression of someone well-versed in manipulation. On the table, a freshly printed contract lay before Natalie, beside it a detailed fee breakdown, crisp from the laser printer in the back. The new printout looked official enough that an average customer would never question it. But with just a glance at the headers, Darius spotted telltale inconsistencies. An unfamiliar font, mismatched line spacing, and most notably, a vertically stretched company logo. This wasn't a technical error. This was a deliberately altered contract. Beneath it were three bolded line items: $495 for a comprehensive electronic protection package, $275 for advanced interior sanitization, and $395 for VIN etching and anti-theft system. Darius read each one as if swallowing shards of glass. The electronic protection package had been removed from the mandatory list since Q1 of last year. The sanitization fee applied only upon customer request with assigned consent. And VIN etching? He was the one who signed off on terminating that service entirely after uncovering how dealerships exploited it to squeeze extra money from uninformed buyers. Even more, the internal system had been updated to block any transaction involving VN etching. If Brent could print this, it meant he was using third-party software or a manual template. That wasn't just procedural misconduct, it hinted at systemic fraud. Across the desk, Natalie still hadn't spoken. She flipped through the documents with slender fingers, unhurried but keen-eyed. When she reached the second section, she paused. "Excuse me," she said, voice soft as breath. "I don't recall seeing these charges in the contract I signed yesterday." Brent shrugged, his demeanor that of someone who dealt with this query dozens of times a day. "Just an update from headquarters. Lately, the company's aiming for more transparency, so we're breaking out the items. Price hasn't changed, just easier to track." He delivered the line flawlessly, without a hint of hesitation. But Darius knew. Brent was weaponizing language. Transparency in this context was just a glossy veneer over a rigged price list. Natalie pressed her lips together, eyes lifting from the pages to meet Brent's. "Is this electronic protection package mandatory?" she asked, tone calm. Brent let out a soft chuckle. "Not mandatory, technically. But if you want to keep that low interest rate, it's part of the finance bundle. Trust me, it's in your best interest." Darius leaned forward slightly, his palms growing warm inside his coat pockets. He remembered clearly, the new financial policies strictly prohibited tying interest rates to optional services. Any employee who deliberately misled customers with such phrasing was in serious violation, and Brent was not confused. He knew exactly what he was doing. That was why Darius had waited in silence, not to test competence, but to measure boldness. Brent wasn't learning to manipulate. He had already mastered it, and his behavior wasn't isolated. It was protected by a belief: no one cares enough to look. Darius inhaled deeply. At that moment, Natalie's gaze flicked toward the door. There was no panic, just a quiet readiness. Darius knew that look, the look of someone who had once been wounded by silence, but this time was prepared for someone to step through and break it. The finance office felt like it had been sealed in thick air. No one raised their voice, no one objected, yet every word and motion from Brent Holloway seemed to compress pressure into every molecule of the space. He smiled, placing a ballpoint pen engraved with the company logo on the addendum form, then slid it gently toward Natalie Carter. "All that's left is a signature," he said smoothly. "Just a final check-off. You already signed the contract. This is just standard procedure." Natalie looked at the pen, then at the faint italicized line at the bottom of the page. "I acknowledge having received full disclosure of the additional charges." A simple sentence, but if she signed, she would be formally bound to fees that had never been explained at the outset. She didn't speak immediately. She simply gripped her file folder a little tighter, eyes shifting slowly to Brent. "Can I take this home to review? I'd like to read it carefully before signing." What sounded like an innocuous question caused the atmosphere in the room to pause. Brent still smiled, but his lips had tightened. He flipped the paper back, tapped the signature line. "The car's being detailed out in the lot. If you leave now, the entire file has to be redone. You'll lose the interest rate from yesterday, and the car will go to the next buyer. You already signed. So, just sign again. Don't let a small thing complicate the process." Natalie didn't answer immediately, but something in her eyes changed. No more doubt, no more pleasantness. She looked at him like someone examining a wound. No flinch, no reaction, just a clear recognition of what she was touching. But just as Brent prepared to speak again, his voice dropped, colder now. "You already signed. So shut up, take the car, and go." The words, though spoken in a small office, rang in Darius's mind like steel clashing on stone. He didn't need to hear more. He stepped from behind his vantage point, crossed the hallway, past the empty refreshment station, rounded the frosted partition, and, without knocking, opened the finance office door with deliberate force. Natalie turned, momentarily stunned. Brent shot up, eyes twitching, unsure what had just happened. Darius said nothing of who he was. He didn't raise his voice. But each footstep, each breath, each word he was about to speak carried a gravity that could not be ignored. He looked straight at the paper on the table. "The delivery fee isn't part of the original agreement," he said clearly, "and it's not in the company's approved system." Brent blinked. "Sorry, who are you?" Darius turned to Natalie, voice softer. "You don't have to sign anything. The original contract is still valid. These charges are not." Then he faced Brent again, each word firm. "And you know that." Brent scrambled to recover. Like a man realizing too late he's stepped into quicksand. "I'm just following protocol. I've been here 4 years. I know how it works. These packages get added by the system. It's just standardization." "Then," Darius cut in, "show me where in the system it allows VIN etching at this rate. Right here, in front of her." In that moment, silence was no longer an option. Natalie slowly stood up, no longer hesitant. Her eyes held no tears, no outrage, only a calm so sharp it cut through the tension. She didn't need to raise her voice to be believed. The truth was speaking through Brent's unraveling. And just then, in the hallway beyond, a figure in a gray blazer appeared, Ansel Ford, the general manager of the Charlotte branch. When he saw who stood inside the room, he froze. "Mr. Langston," he whispered, like swallowing a chill in the middle of summer. Brent turned, confused. "What? You're—" But Darius didn't look at him. He spoke only one sentence, eyes still fixed on Natalie. "I'm sorry. This is not how we treat customers. Not under my name." The air inside the glass office had thickened, as if every sound in the showroom had been sucked into the space between the three people. Brent Holloway stood frozen, the pen still hovering in his hand. No longer a tool of sales, but an excess piece of evidence for something he could no longer explain. Natalie Carter remained silent, but her gaze had softened, not because she felt safe, but because at last she no longer had to stand alone. And Darius Langston, in his worn khaki jacket and faded jeans, was no longer a man hidden in plain sight. He was the voice this system had long forgotten to listen to. General Manager Ansel Ford stepped in, his leather shoes tapping softly against the stone floor, creating a jarring sound in the heavy silence. He nodded faintly, stammering, "Mr. Langston, if I'd known you were—" Darius raised a hand, cutting him off. "Not now," he said curtly. Then he turned to Natalie, his voice dropping in pitch. "I'm truly sorry for what happened here, and for the fact that you had to endure it again under a name I've failed to protect." Natalie gently shook her head, saying nothing. Darius wasn't asking for forgiveness. He only wanted her to know that this apology was not a courtesy. He pulled from his back pocket a business card, the kind with a matte silver edge printed only for the highest level executives. He slid it toward her, eyes locked on a face that had changed over the years, yet still held the same unmistakable resolve. "This is my direct number. I'd like to personally reprocess your transaction, and this time, nothing gets printed unless you understand every line from the start." Brent swallowed hard, voice cracking. "Wait, you're serious? I was just doing what everyone else—" "And that," Darius cut in, "is exactly why I need to know who everyone else is." He turned to Ansel, not angry but no longer gentle. "I want a meeting room, now." Ansel nodded rapidly and led them through the hallway to the left. Darius turned softly to Natalie. "If you have a bit more patience, please come with me. I want to make sure this time everything is done right, from start to finish." She didn't answer right away. She looked down at the baby sleeping peacefully in the carrier by her feet. Then, with a decisive motion, she grasped the handle, lifted the seat, and followed him, not hurried, but with full intention. Down the hallway, all whispering fell silent as the three passed. A few salespeople stood off to the side, confused expressions on their faces. Brent trailed behind, his steps sluggish, like a man whose mask had been torn off in public. Inside the meeting room, Darius pulled a chair out for Natalie before seating himself across from her. Ansel closed the door and stepped aside, while Brent leaned against the wall, arms folded, trying to mask his confusion behind a confidence that had long faded. Darius took the file Brent had left earlier, flipped it open, and marked 3 fee lines with a pen. 495, 275, and 395, he read aloud. You call this standard procedure? Brent exhaled sharply. Everyone does it. I'm not the first. It's just how we maintain margin consistency. Darius didn't respond immediately. He lifted his eyes and locked them on Brent's. I didn't build this company to survive on cheap tricks. He paused, then continued. The electronic protection package is optional, not mandatory. Interior sanitization is a by-request service. And VIN etching? You should remember who removed it from the system back in 2021. Brent went rigid, lost for words. Natalie sat still, her fingers gently gripping the handle of the car seat. But Darius knew that silence no longer came from hurt, but from strength. She didn't need to speak. The truth was speaking for her. 3 days later, the atmosphere at Langston Auto Charlotte was no longer the same. The sun rose high, casting golden light through the glass storefront like a veil across the white stone floor, but the staff were no longer casually lingering around the counters as usual. All sales operations were paused until 11 o'clock by internal directive. Phones went to voicemail, emails were left unanswered. Today, no one was allowed to sell anything until they had heard what needed to be said. Every employee, from management, sales, and technicians to janitorial staff, was invited to the large meeting room behind the showroom. No one was forced to attend, but everyone showed up. Even part-time workers stood quietly along the walls near the vending machines and worn leather chairs. Darius Langston entered through the main doors, no longer in disguise. A navy suit tailored to perfection hugged his tall frame, polished leather shoes, and a steel gray watch wrapped around his left wrist. He needed no microphone, no business card, no formal introduction. His presence alone was enough. Darius did not stand behind a podium. He stood in front of everyone, nearly at eye level with the first row. He began speaking, his voice deep but steady, as if recounting something most had long forgotten. I founded Langston Auto in 2004. Not with millions in investment, not with sponsors or a franchise name, just 3 used cars parked behind a barbecue joint in Murfreesboro. A few quiet chuckles rippled through the room. He continued. That first week, I sold exactly 3 cars, and I washed each one myself. There was no formula for success, just 2 things I held on to, dignity and my word. The room gradually fell silent. Eyes slowly lifted from phone screens to the man standing before them, not reading a script, not putting on a show, simply telling the truth. And then one day, he went on, we started to change. Not all of us, but enough that I had to come back. We began letting pressure overtake patience. We started seeing customers as targets, not people. We added charges because we thought no one would notice. We turned single mothers away at the door because they wore hoodies instead of blazers. And worst of all, we laughed when they dared to ask questions. A beat of silence followed. Then from the back corner of the room, a young male voice spoke up, slightly shaky but clear. What if someone was doing the right thing and nobody noticed? Heads turned. It was Miles Ortega, the valet, slim build, but eyes full of resolve. Darius offered a faint smile. Then starting today, he replied, we start noticing. He walked over and pulled a slim gray envelope from his suit pocket. He handed it to Miles, gently. The young man opened it, confused, then froze. A letter of appointment, moving him from valet to sales associate trainee with full training and benefits. Because on that entire morning, Darius said, turning back to face the room, he was the only one who looked a customer in the eye and said, "Good morning." No one applauded. They didn't need to. The room remained still, but something deep within had been stirred. An awakening. Langston Auto was not built on profit. It was built on decency. And if we ever forget that, let this be the reminder. After that morning's company-wide meeting, no one left the room with the same mindset they had when they walked in. Something in the way Darius Langston stood before them, not accusing, not threatening, just telling a story, made everyone reflect. Not out of fear of losing their jobs, but because they began to ask themselves, if I were that customer, if I were Natalie, would I feel that justice had been served? The restructuring began that very week. No delays, no compromises. Darius ordered the legal department to audit every sales contract from the past 90 days. Any fee that wasn't clearly explained or lacked a customer's signature had to be fully refunded. 5 of Brent Holloway's transactions were found to contain serious violations, 2 of which resulted in nearly full refunds. Natalie received close to $1,200 back within 48 hours. But money wasn't the end. It was just the first step in restoring honor. More importantly, Darius instituted a mandatory series of training programs for all regional managers and lead sales staff across the company, 3 intensive weeks on professional ethics, customer psychology, and financial transparency. In an internal email, he wrote simply, "We don't need people who know how to sell well. We need people who don't have to lie to sell." Then came a surprising move. Darius invited Helen Briggs to return. She had once been the head receptionist at the Charlotte branch, known for her no-nonsense demeanor and high standards. But she had resigned 2 years earlier, leaving only one message in the system: "I no longer recognize this place." Now she returned in a new role, Director of Regional Customer Relations. In her first meeting, Helen didn't open with pleasantries. She drew a responsibility flowchart on the board, then drew a bold red line connecting the sales department to the finance office. "There will no longer be 2 systems," she said, "one for employees and one for customers. Everything happens under the same light." And true to her word, Helen's first decision was to install a full glass wall along the finance department, connecting it visually to the customer reception area. No more closed doors, no more private conversations between the seller and the pricing sheet. No more, "You'll understand in a minute." Every transaction, every charge would be explained in front of the customer and within view of everyone. She also added a large screen in the waiting area, broadcasting a live feed from the finance office. "If we're doing nothing wrong," she said, "we have nothing to fear from being seen." The change didn't happen overnight, but a few days later, Darius returned, standing quietly among the newly polished used cars. No one noticed him, and he didn't need to be noticed. He just wanted to see how things operated when the boss wasn't in the room. And he saw something different: a young salesperson kneeling beside an elderly customer, patiently explaining each line on the technical spec sheet, not pushing, not rushing. No metric could quantify that moment, but Darius knew. That was the thing that truly mattered. On that Sunday, before the sun had fully risen, Darius Langston sat alone on the porch of his mother's old house on the outskirts of North Nashville. The ceramic mug in his hand carried the dense aroma of black coffee, no sugar, no cream, just a faint warmth lingering in the early breeze. Before him stretched a small yard, the grass patchy, a few lavender bushes from last year still standing strong as if defying time. The house was far from luxurious, some walls with peeling paint, a tilted window frame, a torn screen door at the side, but to Darius, this was where everything began. He pulled from his coat pocket an old photo, its corners curled, the surface worn thin by time. In it, he was around 9 or 10, standing beside his mother, both grinning next to a rust-colored Cutlass Supreme. The car wasn't new when they bought it, but back then, his mother had saved every dollar from her night shifts at the hospital just to walk into a dealership without needing a co-signer. The salesman, an older man with silver hair, wasn't in a rush. He explained every term in the contract, every interest rate, every minor condition as if his mother were a VIP, not just a low-income black nurse. Darius sat beside her, absorbing not only the man's words, but his gaze, his respect, and what Darius now realized was dignity. From that moment, he learned his first and most important life lesson. A person's worth isn't defined by what they carry in their wallet, but by how they're treated. And that lesson followed him throughout his journey of building Langston Auto Group. The following week, he ordered a small metal plaque to be mounted above the main entrance of every branch. Not a marketing slogan, not a sales goal, just one line etched in muted steel. "We serve every customer as if they're buying their first car. with patience, respect, and honesty. Not long after, Natalie Carter returned to the Charlotte dealership for her first scheduled maintenance. She still wore her hoodie, her hair tied up, her little girl now older, eyes wide open, tugging at the ear of a stuffed bear. When she entered the service bay, Miles Ortega was the first to recognize her. "Ms. Carter, remember me?" he greeted, his smile genuine. "That silver Corolla still running smooth?" She nodded, returning a warm glance. "Very smooth. Thank you." No one mentioned the past. There was no need. Everything was different now. From the director's office on the second floor, Darius watched through the glass. He didn't step out, didn't intrude on the moment. Because this time the story wasn't about him anymore. What mattered wasn't the speech or the refund. It was what was now clearly reflected in the eyes of both staff and customers. Trust was returning. He turned back to his desk, where Helen Briggs was reviewing customer feedback from the newly launched system. In another corner, Miles was guiding an elderly woman through a rental contract, patiently without rushing. And Natalie. She had taken a seat in the waiting area, reading a book while her daughter slept peacefully beside her. Darius didn't need applause. He didn't need media praise or celebratory articles. He only needed to walk across his showroom floor without wondering who smiled at him while lying behind his back. He just needed to know that when a woman returned and asked, "Why is this fee showing up today?" the answer would no longer be an excuse. It would be the truth, clear, direct, and never wrapped in pressure or shame. Because a decent business isn't built on campaigns. It is built on how we treat the smallest among us, in moments when no one else is watching. Customer trust is not lost in a single day, but gradually fades through silent headshakes, vague fees, and indifference when no one is watching. Yet it is in those simple moments, a sincere nod, an honest gaze, that trust can begin to return. If this story made you reflect on how businesses treat people, don't forget to like and subscribe to join us on journeys that seek out decency. And leave a comment below with the phrase, "I saw it," if you've ever witnessed a moment where doing what's right meant speaking up at just the right time.